Many events of the 20th century have changed the world into what it is nowadays. Most of them have affected the humanity, but some also have brought us calmness. The 20th century was full of revolutions. First, the Bolshevik Party was established in Russia in 1903, led by Vladimir Lenin, who believed in Marxism, and they considered themselves as the leaders of the revolutionary working class in Russia. Russia participated in a war against Japan called Russo-Japanese War in 1904, where Japan launched a surprise naval attack against a Russian naval base in China. The leader of Japan was Meiji Tenno. The Tsushima battle in Japan put end to the Russo-Japanese War. A year later, the Bloody Sunday took place in Russia, a peaceful demonstrators marching to present a petition to the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and people were gunned by the Imperial Guard. The Treaty of Portsmouth, signed by the USA in 1905, put end to the Russo-Japanese War. In America, the Mexican Revolution of 1910 was taking place, and it started because of the Plan de San Luis, stated by Francisco I. Madero, which consisted in getting rid of Porfirio's regime. People wanted to get rid of Porfirio Diaz because of social disparity, and he had been in the presidency for 30 years. In Asia, 1912, the Republic of China was established, and Sun Yat-sen of the Nationalist Party was proclaimed provisional president. A year later, Madero is overthrown by Emiliano Zapata, a revolutionary leader that fought for social justice in Mexico with the Ayala Plan, which announced Madero's presidency. The world was getting out of control, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination set off a chain of events that led to the start of World War I in 1914. Some of the actual presidents that participated in the war were Woodrow Wilson from USA, Nicholas II from Russia, and the German Emperor Wilhelm II. In 1917, USA entered into the war because the Germans sent a telegram to Mexico in which the Germans asked them to go to the war against USA. This pushed USA to join the war. The war ended with the Treaty of Versailles in 1918, which was signed between the Allied nations, Britain, France, Italy, and Russia. Not everything was good after the war, because in India, the Amritsar massacre killed approximately 379 unarmed demonstrators meeting at the Jallianwala Bagh, British versus Gurkha troops. 1 year later, Mahatma Gandhi, founder of the National Indian Congress, launched peaceful non-cooperation movements against British rule in India. While India was trying to achieve its independence, in 1923 Turkey got independent with Mustafa Kemal as the new president. In 1929, USA suffered the longest-lasting economic downturn in history, better known as the Great Depression.
On early 1936, the Spanish Civil War started. The country was divided into two parts. It was carried out by part of the army against the Second Spanish Republic, which was planned by Francisco Franco and other generals. At the same year and in the same continent, the Rome-Berlin Axis was announced. This was a treaty of cooperation between Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, and Fascist Italy, led by Benito Mussolini. 2 years later, on the other side of the world, Lázaro Cárdenas, president of Mexico in that term, expropriated the Mexican oil industry. Another pact in Europe was signed, this time between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin from Russia, called the Non-Aggression Pact before the beginning of World War II in 1939. When Germany invaded Poland, shortly Britain and France declared war on Germany, the Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland, and Germany directly annexed those former Polish territories along Germany's eastern border. When the war started, Japan Emperor Hirohito allied with Nazi Germany and Italy, forming the Tripartite Pact. After 2 years, Germany betrayed the Soviet Union with the Operation Barbarossa, which was the code name for Nazi Germany invasion of the Soviet Union. After almost 6 years of war, an atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. This nuclear attack, led by Harry S. Truman, President of the United States, in 1945, formed part of the end of World War II, and has been one of the 2 nuclear attacks in history. After 3 days, another atomic bomb attack was dropped in Nagasaki, resulting finally in Japan unconditional surrender and officially ended the war. On Asia, 2 years later, the Indian National Congress, guided by its leader Mahatma Gandhi, with the help of Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, negotiated the Indian independence from Britain. This led to the end of British rule. A year later, on 1948, Pakistan invaded Kashmir, but the ruler of Kashmir asked India for help. So at the end, Kashmir is divided into Pakistani-controlled part and an Indian-controlled part.
Revolution still happening, and in 1952 a nationalist revolutionary movement led the revolution against the Bolivian government. The revolution started with a hunger march through La Paz. During this time there was a lot of discrimination and segregation to people of different races, especially in USA. Finally, Nationally Civil Rights Act is signed in 1964. It ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination. The leader of the Civil Rights Act was Martin Luther King. In Mexico, their student protesters staged a number of demonstrations in an attempt to get international attention to what they see as lack of social justice and democracy in Mexico. On October 2nd, Mexican security forces and military troops surrounded a demonstration at the historic Tlatelolco Plaza and opened fire, known as the Tlatelolco Massacre of Mexico of 1968. 1 year later, Neil Armstrong becomes the first man on the moon. Their accomplishment placed the United States against the Soviets in the space race and gave people around the world the hope of future space exploration.
In 1971, the Indo-Pakistan War was the third war between India and Pakistan, in which Pakistan launched airstrikes on Indian air bases. The next year, the Strategic Arms Limitation was an agreement signed between Richard Nixon from the United States and Leonid Brezhnev from the USSR, an agreement that talks about the limitations of the nuclear weapons. Also, in this same year, the European Free Trade Agreement, which is formed by Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland, organized to remove barriers to trade in industrial goods between them. In 1975, Microsoft was founded by Paul Allen and Bill Gates to develop and sell basic interpreters for Altair 8800. Meanwhile, in Spain, Juan Carlos became president of Spain after Franco's death. Also in this same year, the Vietnam War occurred, a long-armed conflict between the north and the south of Vietnam. A year later, a war known as the Dirty War of Argentina was something traumatic for them, because many citizens were killed and seized by authorities. And it occurred a similar situation in Bolivia. In 1978, there was a military coup, which was led by Juan Pereda Asbun. Meanwhile, in Europe, there was a new pope, Pope John Paul II. He was the second longest serving pope in modern history. A year later, in Asia, Mother Teresa received the Nobel Peace Prize for her humanity work. In this same year, the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty was signed in Washington, D.C. Several years later, in 1984, Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, was killed by Sikh bodyguards. This resulted in riots that lasted 4 days, and Sikhs died in revenge attacks. And from 1988 to 1990, Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. She was the first woman elected as head of Muslim nation. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Berlin Wall is finally destroyed in 1989. The East German government opened the country's borders with West Germany, and openings were made in the Berlin Wall through which East Germans could travel to the west. Meanwhile, in Poland, Lech Walesa becomes president in 1990, changing Poland's government from a communist regime to a capitalist one. And in America, in the year 1990, PAN wins the election, and Vicente Fox becomes elected president of Mexico. In 1992, the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed between Bush of the United States and the Prime Minister Brian Mulroney of Canada, and it calls for a phasing out of the long-standing trade barriers between the three nations.
Throughout the semester, we have been collecting important events that have left a mark in history. On the first partial, we searched online for important events in Asia. We found out that Japan was the only country that has ever won in a war versus Russia. Or for example, Indian independence and how Gandhi achieved winning a Pacific revolution. Even knowing how Korea was before being separated into South and North, and how is the regime that still nowadays rules. We believe that knowing this continent history is helping us in order to understand our cultural differences. Even though we did not search for many historical events in Africa, we learned and got to understand how was apartheid and the impact that it caused on our society. We are totally against discrimination of any kind, so seeing this was something we are not used to see often. Nelson Mandela was a brave man which his main purpose was to unify South Africa. This man was a legend and an inspiration to all of us.
The European countries looked for power and land, which caused many conflicts. There was a lot of tension between most of these countries. The breaking point was the assassination of Ferdinand, which caused World War I. This led to several other conflicts. Then the Versailles Treaty signed, but Hitler later breaks it, causing World War II. In several countries of Europe, they had totalitarian regimes, which were characterized by oppression and no rights or liberty. So basically, these times in Europe were characterized by different wars and conflicts, mainly for power and land. We learn about a series of events that happened during the Mexican Revolution, since the Porfiriato, the fight for the power, social problems, the end of the revolution, praise government, etc. Other countries such as Bolivia and Argentina fight against its government too. Meanwhile, in USA they had other type of problems too. First, economical, like the Great Depression, and then social, the racism and discrimination. But there wasn't just bad things, they solved their problems and got important achievements too. In summary, it was a difficult time since all the conflicts and wars during this period and the problems they brought. There were many achievements too, like the Civil Rights Act, the oil expropriation, Penn wins election for the first time, and the foundation of Microsoft, and several others.